You're listening to Al Pastor, the show that helps you love God, love your neighbor, and eat more tacos. I'm your host, Pastor Brian. Welcome to the show. Well, hello, friends. I want to welcome you to another podcast. We're covering Matthew 22, 41 through 46. If you'd allow me just a moment here to interject, I want to encourage you on your daily devotion. Just asking you some questions that you can reflect on. How is your time today? Did you make time? Did you make your devotion and prayer time and worship time a priority with Jesus? I hope that you did. And regardless of where you're listening from or how you're listening, if you're listening to this on the go or even if you're sitting down, I pray that this will be a blessing to you. So again, we're covering Matthew 22, 41 through 46, a little bit of context. This is the end. We're at the end of Jesus's dialogue with the leaders of Israel. And this is, in essence, we're coming up to the summit or the peak, crescendo that Matthew is taking us on. And you'll see in just a minute, because we have what is known as a high Christological theme that's going on here. Jesus is going to reveal the true nature of who he is, that he is more than just the Son of David, that there is more to being the Messiah than just a conquering king. He is, in fact, there is a divine nature. We would use the word deity. That means God. Okay, he is God in the flesh. So let's read our text and let's see if we can glean some things from this. Matthew 22:41. It says, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Jesus asked them. I'm going to pause there. Now, I want you to think about this, because all throughout the narrative of Matthew, the Pharisees have been questioning. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, the elders, they've been questioning Jesus. Now, Jesus has turned the tables. It's not that Jesus hasn't questioned them within his conversation, but here we have an appearance that Jesus has initiated the conversation. And again, remember, this is the last conversation that he's going to have specifically with them. So Jesus asks them. I like that because he initiates it. Verse 42 saying, what do you think about the Christ? Okay, let's pause there for a second. Sometimes our translations don't do us justice, because understand when he says, what do you think about the Christ? He's asking them, what do you think about the Messiah? For them, it would be as if we're saying, what do you think about the one who is going to come, the one that is going to save us all, the one that's going to turn things around, the anointed one, the one that has been promised all throughout Scripture? What do you think about the Messiah? Now, please understand that in Israel's history, there had been many types of the Messiah. There would be messianic figures, but there was one ultimately who would come. So this is his specific reference. Now, you might say, well, what do you mean by messianic figures? During a period of time known as the intertestamental time, that would be the period of time between Malachi and Matthew, there were messianic figures such as the Maccabees, who help raise up a revolt against the oppression that the people of God were facing. In Isaiah 45, even King Cyrus was called by God himself a Christ. It says that he is God's anointed. So to be God's anointed in this sense means to be the Christ. So there were several figures. All the priests and the kings were messianic figures, but there was one, this concept that he is speaking of and that they definitely understand is a reference to the Messiah. Okay, so what do you think about that guy? Whose son is he? And so they said to him, the Son of David. Now they're correct in this, because this is what was promised to David. David had a promise that his throne, there would come one who would rule forever. And so this is what they're waiting for. This expectation was very, very high. And so he's speaking very generally here And even Matthew himself, in Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, he shows that Jesus is the Son of David. So the Son of David is interchangeable with the term Christ, Messiah. We would say the King, the Anointed One. Verse 43, he said to them, how then does David in the Spirit call him Lord, saying, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies a footstool. What a great question, because he's gonna stop them dead in his tracks. Listen to the question, verse 45. If David then calls him Lord, how is he his son? Wow, incredible question that we need to really explore. Jesus is introducing, he's using the rabbi's method almost against them. This is a rabbinical method of setting up in the hearts and the minds of the listeners a contradiction, like asking a question. How can these two things be true at the same time? And then he's going to resolve it. So this was very common in the way that rabbis spoke and taught. And so I love that Jesus does the very same thing. He's saying, if the Messiah is David's son, then how can the great king, right, the venerated, the exalted King David address him as Lord? In other words, how can he be his son at the same time and be his Lord? Now, culturally, we need to understand this concept. There would be no patriarch, no king who would call his son my Lord. This would be the opposite. You would not do that whatsoever. And so Jesus even adds that David himself was speaking by what? The Spirit. In other words, we would say that is divine inspiration. Listen to the words of 2 Samuel 23:2. This is David speaking. He says, the Spirit of the Lord spoke by me, and his word was on my tongue. This was some of the last words of King David. And so he's saying David was inspired. He was guided, and he spoke by the Spirit. And so Jesus is not denying that the Messiah is David's son. In fact, yes, he is David's son. And that is all throughout Matthew. But what he's saying here is he's saying that the Messiah, as well as being David's son, is more. He is more than just David's son. He is David's Lord. Now, there's a scholar by the name of D.A. Carson. Listen to what he says. He says, what Jesus does is synthesize the concept of a human Messiah in David's line with the concept of a divine Messiah who transcends human limitations. We might need to unpack that a little bit. The conception of the Messiah is that he would be an ordinary human being that God would touch and anoint and raise him up, and he would be extraordinary, okay? So the humanity of the Messiah, there was no concept of a divine nature. So Jesus brings he starts with the concept of the human or humanity of the Messiah in David's line because he's the son. And then he's bringing in the divine aspect because David calls him Lord. That means whoever this Messiah is, he was enthroned at the right hand of God. Notice the words, the Lord said to my Lord. So Jesus is using the scripture. And what's he quoting, by the way? He's quoting Psalm 110. And this is a very well-known passage of scripture. It's a messianic prophecy. And by the way, if you have time, and if you don't have time, make the time, go through and read Psalm 10. In fact, we might do it in Bible study tonight because it's so good. This is a messianic prophecy spoken by David, much of which, by the way, will be fulfilled when Jesus comes back. Language of like making all your enemies your footstool, and the judgment of kings and all of those things. And so we see that David calls his son Lord, and that David's son is sitting at the right hand of the Father. Very, very interesting. So this cannot be David himself, but it must refer to the Messiah. So this, by Jesus quoting this, here's what it does. It establishes two things. It establishes the royal glory and the power of the Messiah sitting at the right hand is where all power and authority flow. And it also shows the ultimate victory of the Messiah over his enemies. This is demonstrated by the quote that says, "Your enemies shall be your footstool." So here's the question. If David calls him Lord, how then is he his son? So Jesus is continuing with this question. And again, he's painting this figure, this messianic figure, David's son, as the one that is sitting at the right hand of God. And so he's elevating, the concept of the Messiah from just an ordinary, special human being to one who is uniquely manifesting the presence of God. And so this is two ideas coming together to shift the cultural concept of the Messiah. And then notice the response in verse 46. No one is able to answer him with a word, and they are not going to ask him with any, or dare to ask him any questions anymore. Now, I'm going to read to you just a little bit out of some application. This comes out of the Zondervan Exegetical Commentary of the New Testament, author by the name of Osborne. He says this is one of the climactic points of Matthean Christology. I get tongue-tied sometimes, okay? Jesus is now uncovering the messianic secret in a public setting and going beyond the triumphal entry by showing that he transcends his earthly role as descendant of David and embraces his heavenly role as Son of God and Lord, stated clearly in the early creed. Now, let me unpack that for you, okay? You might say, what do you mean Jesus is now uncovering the messianic secret? Well, most scholars have identified, the question is oftentimes, it seems like Jesus is hiding. What I mean by hiding is hiding what his true nature is. Like, why doesn't Jesus just raise his hand and say, hey, guys, hello, my name is Jesus. I am the Messiah. I'm the one. And just right out say it. It seems like he at times tiptoes around that. And the reason that he does that, okay, I'm going to try to make this super simple. The reason that he often does this is because of the cultural concepts or the baggage that comes attached with that idea or with that concept of the Messiah. Now, at the time, of course, we know you've heard this often, and if you're hearing it for the first time, that's okay as well. The idea in the first century of the Messiah is that they are going to overthrow Rome, that Israel's going to go from being the tail to the head, that all their circumstances are going to change in the natural. And that will happen when Jesus comes back. But the reason that Jesus didn't just outright explicitly say it in all of his teaching is because you're going to have folks trying to follow him for the wrong reasons. They're going to, at one time they wanted to form an army and they wanted to help lead a revolt. The people, just look at Palm Sunday. They were ready. They are ready. So this idea of the messianic secret, the Osborne says Jesus is now uncovering the messianic secret. He's not only uncovering it, he's elevating this thing. He's saying, yes, I am the Messiah, but I'm much more. I am the Son of God. I am the one who sits on the throne. And so this is just beautiful. Let's go through a little bit more. Critical scholars at times have hesitated to ascribe deity to this passage, for there is separation between the Lord/Yahweh and Lord/Messiah in Psalm 110. However, Bruner rightly quotes Luther on this. And here's this quote. Sit, says God to him, not at my feet, not over my head, but next to me, as high as I sit. But sitting next to God, what else is that than being also God? For God is so jealous for his honor that he has said himself in Isaiah 42:8, he will give his glory to no other. And yet here, says the psalmist, sits one who is like him. From this follows that he must be God. Now, our problem today isn't necessarily seeing the deity of Christ. That means that he's God and he is Lord. The problem today that we have is a little bit different. It's not that we would deny the deity of Jesus, it's that we would ignore his deity in our lives. And one of the sad results of denigration of just Bible literacy and theology in general in the popular seeker-sensitive church is to lower the status of Jesus to just a friend, to just being your bro, just being your companion, instead of him being the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the very God that sits on the throne. You know, and Jesus, here's the truth. Jesus is our friend. I mean, he clearly said that. But we minimize his authority and his kingship. I agree with Osborne. Osborne says it's time to worship Jesus as Lord with a new depth. I think that we need to come new and fresh to Jesus with fear and with trembling. And yes, he is our friend, but he's also our King. He is the Son of David, but he is also the Son of God. He is the one that is seated on the throne where all power and authority flows. Hey, friends, if you've got anything whatsoever that I can help you out with, if you've got more questions, if you've been studying this out, just let me know. I'm recording this on a Wednesday. I'm really looking forward to Bible study this evening and hopefully hearing from some of you on some things that you want to know more about, maybe some things you struggle with, or maybe some things that just blessed you as well. So we'll see you on the next one. Thank you for listening to Al Pastor with Brian Overturf. If you found value in this, please subscribe and get updates. Most places podcasts are available. We're right here on Anchor FM through Spotify, also on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon, and iHeartRadio. I hope you'll tune in for the next episode. Until then, we'll see you later.